Please understand that many of these models are very heavily works in progress, and as a result shouldn't be taken as the final product. Thank you for your cooperation.
Hey, my name's Shadow Steel, and you're watching Trackside. All aboard?
Alright guys, so we're back on the test track again. You've noticed that we do have a familiar face sitting right over there. We do have a few other locomotives on the set to really get a good look at. So I want to get out of the way. The first set of locomotives is the updated locomotives here, the Frisco E8s especially. Now, originally when you saw these Frisco E8s, they were slightly different, pretty plain. The only thing that was added on these locomotives was a stripe down the lower level here, the numbers on the corners, and finally their names. Each of the locomotives now have their proper names on them, as well as numbers on the side. So each of these locomotives do have a name, a number, their details added, so they're now back. So they're now in their Frisco glory, honestly. There was a slight issue recently with the cab being a missing texture bug or whatever, but I learned that the game somehow finds the textures in the locomotive folder, but does not reference the actual locomotive folder like the Amtrak folder in general. So the cab view had to be moved over to the Amtrak folder. I mean, from the Amtrak folder to the locomotive folder. So other than a few changes on these locomotives, such as the numbers, the lining, and the names, these are relatively the same. Not much has changed. In fact, I actually had to go about fixing a few issues on them, but in all, they're ready to go. These will be updated and released later on. I'll explain where they're being updated about halfway through the video. Also, one other thing, I have actually way over here, there's actually a few other locomotives. There is one thing I do want to talk about with these locomotives in general. So, it turns out locomotive 2022 actually had two different names. The name that she's most well known for is Champion, which is Gene Audrey's horse. Which he was actually an employee of the Frisco Railroad, so that actually has some merit to it. And he's a movie star as well and whatnot. But she did have an alternate name when she was first built. This is actually her name after a rebuild. So you got that going for you. I'm also planning on fixing this. It turns out on the F7s that is through the that's available through the U.S. Locomotive and Asset Pack, they actually have the emblem properly made. But for some reason, Dovetail Games decided to leave the emblem blank. So I'm going to go ahead and go through and see if I can find a matching emblem to match that of the actual emblem seen there. That's going to be added later on. So another set of units I want to get out of the way is, in addition to the Frisco E8s, I'm working on a set of currently Frisco GP35s. Now these, like I said in the intro, these are heavily works in progress. So there's still some details being done, such as the numbers needing to be moved out of this position. They need to be removed and moved under the cab. In fact, those numbers will be moved upward. The logo will be removed, and numbers like this will be removed. But the inspiration actually came about from the demonstration units that are available through Dovetail Games through the marketplace. The marketplace skins of the demonstrated units had the same scheme as the Frisco GP35s, which actually use the same number system as the Union Pacific. So you got two for the price of one right there. So these units, though slightly different from the Union Pacific from the Frisco model, are relatively close. They're designed similarly. There's probably going to be a few changes made to these later on, such as the fans being repaired in some way or shape or form. I keep forgetting about that. Every time I do that, it just messes up the fan in some way. Number boards probably will have to be fixed up as well. Didn't expect to see that there. But nonetheless, there's still some work to be done on these locomotives. A lot of work, actually. But I'll talk about that probably in another video. After all, I'm going to be doing these repaint showcases regularly now. Now, before we get into the cotton belt locomotives, I do want to talk about these cars here. This is pretty much the Frisco segment. These are Frisco lightweight passenger cars that I made. These are based off the Frisco's later designs of the Frisco passenger equipment. The Frisco did use some of these cars in service after the Texas Special was discontinued. So if you look up pictures of like these cars, you'll see that some of them do not say Texas Special, but instead say Frisco on the top. That's what I did up here. And actually, this is actually very interesting. This car, St. Louis, she is not listed anywhere that I can find, but there is but I do have a HO model car, a dome car named St. Louis from the Frisco Railroad. So I thought, well, why not put that there? I do have another car named Oklahoma City, which is actually one of the cars. Or I think it's Oklahoma City or Alabama. Now each of these cars do have some interesting names. Maplewood, got Maplewood over here. You have Kirkwood, one of the main stops in the Frisco Railroad. You have Valley Park. You have Rock Hill. But one car in particular, some people may actually see it or know of it because that actual car still is in service. If I can find where it is. The car is, that's Canadian River. Let's see. Osage. Here it is. This car is actually still around here. This is, I don't know how to pronounce the river name, but it's Crimeron River, I think. This car is still in service. In fact, there's actually one particular photo that got me inspired to remake this car in particular. And that's actually that was taken in 1989 at St. Louis Union Station. 1989, keep that in mind. And this car was seen directly beside St. Louis San Francisco Railroad T54 Mountain Type number 1522. I'm going to talk about her in another video, but there's actually a very special reason for that. But I made this particular car and thought, well, make an entire set, and that's what I did. Now the coaches will have the black roofs because many of the coaches did have black roofs on them. Either that or they were covered in soot later on in their lives, and they were so much covered in soot that they turned black. So don't know. We have a set of baggage cars. Now these baggage cars are still, again, work in progress, but I think I got everything done there. Now the one thing I did. Now if you remember one of my other repaint showcases, you'll actually remember that I did a similar design to these cars for the brigade train, the SOS brigade train that I made. I think I showed that off. If I didn't, well, I'm going to be sorry for myself. And those actually are going to be updated as well. But one of the design quirks about that car, which you'll probably see a little later in another set of repaints I'll talk about, is that the doors on these cars were never repainted. I never repainted them with a red stripe down the middle because it was always so annoying getting this just leveled right. In fact, that's another thing about these doors here. You'll actually see, if you look very closely, you'll see that the door is slightly off from the actual rest of the car, and that this section is also completely off as well from the car. But it's not as noticeable for the main frame as it is for the door. Now the reason for this is that the doors on like the end of each car has its own texture file, separate, and they're in common texture files. However, these were easier to fix because the actual doors on these baggage cars are actually tied with these textures here, the actual like panels here. So it wasn't hard to do that, but it was extremely difficult to do this. Any car that had the doors attached to it, though, such as the diners here, they were easy to repaint because you just had a slight alteration to the car itself. Now, the end of each car is actually very interesting as well because I've only known a handful of reference photos for these cars, but the reference photos do show that the end of each of the Frisco cars is a red color, a similar red paint to the actual ends of the cars. Now, again, this is going to be painted later and some other details. One interesting detail is you see the SLSF logo on the corners here, and the Frisco font seen up here. Now, these cars are actually using the California Zephyr set, and you'll probably notice something just hidden away over there. We'll talk about those later. But these cars are all using the California Zephyr set, the Western Pacific set, mainly because they could have the name on the top and the SLSF low lettering on the side here. Now, along with the Frisco Railroad, the MKT or Katy actually had a fleet of these cars as well, in the same color scheme and everything. And the only difference was that some of the cars were labeled as MKT. So I'll probably think about repainting a handful of those cars into those schemes, but you also notice that there's a lack of an observation car because of the California Zephyr set, as well as a lack of large amounts of dome cars because I didn't see any dome car names in the sets. Now, we're finally on to another set of repaints that these guys are the request portion of the repaint showcase. I've actually had a request by one guy for several repaints recently. These are Cotton Belt SD60s. Now, the Cotton Belt and the Southern Pacific didn't actually own any SD60s that I can find, but I decided, well, why not make a set of fictional Cotton Belt repaints that are in the for SD60s. Now, I probably will make an SD60 a GP60 version of the Cotton Belt patch units and whatnot. But yeah, these are actually various patch units that I've made. Now, I have noticed a few small details on each of these units. So the numbers here, they're actually very interesting because these numbers that I wrote down are actually taken from another unit. Ironically, that unit is sitting right here. While I was making the patch units, I was actually repainting repainting the Frisco GP35s, and I thought, well, these numbers are pretty close to what the Union Pacific uses, so I'll use those for a patch. And I did. Now the patches, the locomotive numbers in the patches are actually part of a decal set, so you can actually trigger these off and on if you do it right. Now again, work in progress. I've still missed a few details on these locomotives, but there's few and far between of these glitches. So another thing about these locomotives is that the Union Pacific only had 85 of these DSD60s, numbered from 6,000 to 6,084. These locomotives, if you haven't noticed, are numbered 6085 through 6085, 6086, 6109, and 6110. Fictional numbers again. Oh, gee, god damn it! I missed it again. Okay, so another thing, they're supposed to have numbers on the top boards here. For some reason, they're not showing up. I don't know why. I'll double check when I get into the game or get into the editor. But they're supposed to have their numbers written on the top boards here, and these numbers are again fictional numbers. So 7610, 7611, which is an unintentional reference to Fallout 76, coming out in November, which is the 11th month of the year, so 7611. 7635 and 7636 are these Cotton Belt locomotives. Now, 7636 is an intentional reference actually to the Union Pacific's 6936, which is one of their locomotives that is still in service. But nonetheless, I got these units working. These are actually part of the freeware versions of the IN12 models that are available through Train Sim Returns. And I'll talk about them a little bit later too. But yeah, I figured the patches are decently designed. They use the Union Pacific Armor Yellow for the patch, so it actually looks a little nice. Cotton Belt and everything. These locomotives were difficult to repaint in general, but I did get a decent design out of them. One particular thing I did notice is that these some of the textures here are slightly squished now that I'm looking at them, but that's par for the course for something like this. Alright, so you remember when I mentioned the cars sitting in the shed here? Well, I do want to show them because they're kind of timely, if you will, in terms of like what it's hard to explain. But these cars that I'm pulling out now, I guess you could say, really do fit the timing of this video. So as we pull them out, I do want to mention one thing is that I do have a personal connection with these cars as well, for many ways, but these were actually a request by the very same guy who requested the Continental locomotives. As you can see here, we have a pair of California Zephyr cars that have been repainted into the Silver Solarium and the Silver Splendor, which the Silver Splendor actually has its Burlington lettering above it. Now, interestingly enough, these particular cars, or at least one of them, does have some history in terms of what I have with. I actually have some history with it for the most part. The Silver Solarium here has actually traveled behind the aforementioned Frisco 1522, which was the steam locomotive that was seen in the picture earlier in the video when I was talking about the Frisco EA passenger cars. And I figured when I got the request to repaint these two cars, he actually said, like, these two cars in particular, he wanted these two cars. The reason I say this is timely is because about a couple weeks ago, before, as I'm recording this video, the Silver Solarium was sold to the Cuyahoga Valley Railroad. Now, if you don't know about the Cuyahoga Valley Railroad, I don't really blame you. I only recently learned about it about a few months ago, actually. No, about a year and a half ago or something like that. Pretty recently. It was right around the time when Norfolk and Western 611 was announced to be restored, so 2015 or so. I'd never heard of the railroad until that around 2015, 2016. Well, the reason I heard about it was because I was looking up videos of the NW J-Class, or NW J-Class whistle. I'm trying to look for the fucking cards. And it turns out, Nickel Plate Road 765 wore a J-Class whistle and a Frisco whistle at the Steam in the Valley event, which was held at Cuyahoga Valley. And the fact that the Cuyahoga Valley has now purchased Silver Solarium as well as 3 other California Zephyr cars, their plan is to simply recreate the California Zephyr set for the most part, because they have a total of, I think, 5 California Zephyr cars currently in their fleet. And from what I've seen so far, no major changes other than possibly the interior for the most part is going to be changed on these cars. So the California Zephyr lettering and everything is going to stay the same, except for probably the CQB lettering, which is CB and Q. Why do I say CBQ? Oh, CQB, Close Quarters Combat is what I'm thinking of. God. Why the fuck am I thinking of that? I've been watching too much anime. Anyway, these cars the cars from the Cuyahoga Valley will probably be seen, have been already introduced on the Cuyahoga Valley as part of their Steam in the Valley event for 2018. And as a little parting gift, I'm probably going to show off a video. And as per usual, I do want to show off these cars in action for the most part. So I'm going to connect up all these cars here. I'm going to set up a small train, honestly, to get these cars moving. But nonetheless, this is the end of the first part of the video. So let's go ahead and transition to our second part, which essentially is talking about the bulk of my repaints. Alright, before we really go into moving on to the next thing, I do want to mention something. I mentioned earlier that there was a missing texture bug for the cab that I eventually got fixed for the E8s. Well, it turns out the California Zephyr cars do have that same bug. If you look in the cab closely, you'll see that the cab actually says, I'll actually pause the game here. Whoops, let me go into there. I'll actually pause the game here and show you you look in the cab, you've got a ton of missing textures, and I'm assuming, because if you look down here, the textures are fine, it's only in the domes. The domes are the only things affected. Now, this is not the case all the way down here for the Frisco Dome. The St. Louis Dome seems to be just fine. And I'm assuming the passenger review folder, which I did not copy over for the two domes here, which, by the way, they're in separate folders, so just because of this texture alone, the Burlington logo and the California Zephyr logo use the same file, so I couldn't swap them out. But anyway, because of that, I will go ahead and see if that's the issue. So I better really talk about the announcement real soon here, with a midpoint announcement, I guess you could say, because this is pretty important for all my repaints from this point forward. All my repaints from this point forward will be affected by this announcement. So let's move on to that announcement, shall we? Alright guys, so here's the announcement in full. As of this year, earlier this month, September of 2018, I'm a part of a site called Trains and Returns. I am one of the contributors to sending out repaints and whatnot. This is actually what inspired me, from the most part, to repaint the ST60s you saw there, because they're actually on that site. The models are freeware, so I've been repainting those because that's all I had at the point. Well, lo and behold, all of my repaints that I'm working on, 90% of them are going to be released through that site. And I'm working with the team on there to get one of my very first repaints on there. I've talked about it before, the Trackside National Railway E8s. Now, there's going to be an updated version on Trains and Returns, other than the version which I'm going to talk about in this video later. That is, unless you are watching the standalone video. But nonetheless, this site is going to feature all my repaints from this point forward. Now, a handful of them will still be found on Railworks America, but these are going to be the American repaints for the most part. The only other thing you're really going to need to focus on is that 99% of the time, most of these repaints, if they're fictional or in general really, they're going to show up on Trains and Returns first. And then after that, probably, I would say about a week or a month period after being on Trains and Returns, I'm going to send them over to Railworks America if they fit the bill. Say like an American repaint, like the updated Frisco E8s. And yeah, we'll go over there first. Naturally, the Frisco E8s and the Frisco passenger cars are going to be the first real repaints released. I've been working real hard on getting the Trackside National Railway E8s released on Railworks, on Trains and Returns. But there's been a few mix-ups in terms of like who's capable of getting into the site and uploading the files and whatnot. I'm like, I mean, I could do it if I wanted to, but I'm not in charge of the site. I'm not really working on it in full. I'm still a relatively new character here, but as a result, I'm going to be submitting the Frisco E8s and the passenger cars, as of right now, as part of the set on Trains and Returns. Now, you're going to have three options with these cars. You're going to have option A is just the E8s themselves, an updated version of the E8s from Railworks America, essentially. These versions will be the ones featured on this video, feature all those details there. Option B is just the passenger cars. You can just get the passenger cars if you're fine with the Railworks America version of the E8s. And option C is a combo pack featuring both the passenger cars and the E8s. As a result, you'll be getting, that's probably going to be the biggest file. The smallest file will probably be the passenger cars alone. The moderate file will probably be the E8s themselves. So with that, I'd like to direct you to the site link down below. I also want to mention that the Facebook page that Trains and Returns has, I'm actively posting on it now. And you may have noticed on Shadow Steel 18 channel network, you'll notice that I've been sharing those posts in terms of the repaint showcase, and that the Otaku Rail Car Company shops are essentially going to be a listed feature, hopefully, at least in my eyes. Every post I make will be mentioning the Otaku Rail Company Shops, which is the name of the Repaint name I've given myself. So check out the site down below. So, make sure to check everybody else's repaints. There are fabulous. The fact that the SD60s are there from IN's 12 model. These are old SD60s that have been updated from the original versions. These are the original versions that you can get, and that's what my repaints use. I use the Train Sim Return versions of these SD60s, and yeah. Let's get back to the video, shall we? Alright, guys, so as I get the camera adjusted here, you can see right in front of us is the Trackside National Railway's E8 locomotives. We showed these off before, and I want to make sure I did correctly mention these units a little bit more. You can see right beside us we do have another set of locomotives on the side here. So the original numbers on these locomotives was 1000 to 1005. Yeah, that was it, 1000 to 1005, with a set of B units numbered 1000B to 1005B. Well, I decided to expand on that, adding another 5 units, 1006 and 1006B to 1010B, 10 as well as 1010. Okay, this one has always been a problem with me, this little number here, number 1010. Now, interestingly enough, actually the number 1006 actually became something of what, in short, I wanted to make another reference to Dragon Ball Z Abridged for number 1006. Yeah, there's a reference to Dragon Ball Z Abridged with locomotive number 1006.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level?
It's 1006.
What, really?
Yeah, kick his ass, Nappa.
And it's actually very interesting because E8s they were good for passenger service, but they were never built, like many of them, though some were used on freight service, they were never really built for freight service. These were meant for express passenger service. Now, of course, right next to us is the equivalent of a heavy freight locomotive, the DDA-40X series, painted in the Trackside National Railway, lettering and all. Now, you'll notice that this scheme is very different from the GP30 that I painted a long time ago. I'm actually going to repaint all the freight locomotives to this similar scheme, which is similar to that of the Union Pacific's livery. The only difference being is that the scheme has been changed with yellow to royal purple, which actually, this was the design. This was actually a lot of the colors were inspired by the Union Pacific. The red lettering actually came from the Union Pacific, from their locomotives, but the striping was more akin to the Frisco, Pennsylvania, Seaboard, Coastline, stuff like that. Many of the faster trains, and that's why some of the passenger trains are going to be featuring the striping and not the freight units. Now, that's not going to say that the switchers are not going to be repainted. No, I actually have to repaint the switchers from the ground up because I ended up losing them when I reinstalled the game. Yeah, I had to reinstall Railworks. That's why I haven't been submitting much. But these locomotives are numbered from 6940, which is part of the UP's original roster, which is very interesting, to number 6969. Now, that was actually an inside joke for a few guys that I talked about this with. I actually came up with the locomotive design while, out and about while the game was reinstalling. In number 6969 came up as a little bit of a joke for one of the other repaints that we'll be talking about later. The emblem of the Royal Herald is seen on the side of these locomotives, on the panel here. And you'll also notice we have a B unit of the DD35. This is a DD35B unit that we got here. Originally, these locomotives were going to be numbered 200B to 209B, but because the locomotive doesn't support 3-digit numbering, I had to make do with 7, like the double digits. But I may actually repaint this locomotive with a better locomotive with the better scheme and whatnot. Also, unfortunately, due to the way the repaint is work, where the B is actually part of the actual skin, the numbers are decals, which is interesting to say the least. There's also the fact that I could not figure out what decal is what the chain is attached to, so I'm just going to leave that alone for the most part. But it does give it kind of an interesting look, because the chain, though somewhat yellow, it's all the armor yellow was actually this is actually armor yellow right here. This is the Union Pacific's armor yellow, and the red lettering are both from Union Pacific. The royal purple is the only thing that's different from the Union Pacific's livery. Now you'll also notice that the lettering for this locomotive is very different than the Trackside National Railway's Centennials, which they just gave it which I essentially just gave it the original designation, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to call them Centennials. The lettering is very different, very much similar to the Union Pacific lettering. And these locomotives were designed for one purpose: hauling the TOFC set that I've created recently. I've created a set of TOFCs. They're not complete yet, but there's like probably 2 or 3 cars that I still need to fix up. These cars vary with the design. They either have the Red Ball Express lettering down there, just saying Red Ball Express down there. Obvious look. That's an obvious patch, by the way, if you can tell. And if I go further down here, I may have the other one. Aha, here it is. They either have RBX or Red Ball Express. However, there's another set of cars attached to my Tristranian set over here, set up for the Trackside Royal Train. Now, I didn't really talk about this, and I don't think this actually came about recently, but the Trackside Royal Train was, I did talk about it a little bit, but I do have a set made for it specifically. I'm going to be making a set specifically for it. I don't know if I've also talked recently, but I've recently redone the Trastranian cars into heavyweights. So these are the heavyweights from the Bessemer Lake Erie route with the Trastranian lettering and striping, getting it a little bit more detailed look. Down here you also have a set of baggage cars. Now if you remember, the original Trastranian didn't have baggage cars. It just had a lightweight coach that was from Brit Kits for free. I'm going to probably redo that just a little bit to give it a much better feel. But these were very nicely done, at least in my opinion. As the Trackside National Railway grew in size, so too did its fleet of steam locomotives. Many of these locomotives were built for specialized purposes like the GS9, but soon these locomotives were put in reserves as more and more general service locomotives were built. Some of these general service locomotives were part of a series called the R18. Built for speed and power, the 482s were partially inspired by the New York Central's L2D Mohawks. Primarily used in passenger service, one could also see an R18 or two at the head end of a hotshot freight service, or even helping one of their sister classes, the Dragon class. Unlike the R18s, the Dragon class were built with freight in mind, and much like the GS9s before them, they excelled at it. In total, 96 R18s and 96 Dragon class 482s were built for the Trackside National Railway, and all of them still serve to this day. Now, of course, I do have a few other repaints we've been talking about. I actually talked about these two recently in a video, and that's probably the video you just saw earlier, the Mountains of Trackside. But we also have these little guys here. I needed a specialized commuter steam locomotive. I really wanted to use these guys since day one, since I saw them. And these locomotives really fit that bill. All 3 of these locomotives are from Brit Kits. So they're payware for the most part, but they're not that expensive. They're like $10 US for each of these locomotives, like depending on what you get. And if you get these locomotives, which I really recommend, these guys look pretty nice. But they're awkward to drive, honestly. You actually get a set of a combine and heavyweight cars for the commuter service line for these locomotives. Now, I didn't know this, but he's actually designed these locomotives with auto renumbering where it will actually change the lettering on the locomotive. So locomotives between numbers 150 to 155 will actually show the letters of the Tristane National Railway in this kind of font. I think this is similar to the Seaboard Coastline or something like that. I don't remember. It looks very familiar to me, at least. Oh, God. And then after 156 to 200, you get the Tristanian Central Lines. The Tristanian Central Lines was a new railroad I think I came up with recently. I don't think I've talked about it on the Repaint showcase. But it's supposed to be a representation of the Central of New Jersey Railroad, which had quite a large fleet of steam commuter trains, and actually were the operators of the Blue Comet locomotives. Now the mountains here, these are labeled as the R18 class and the Dragon class. Also, this one in particular, these locomotives, I forgot to mention this. These locomotives are labeled as the J4Cs or Jacks. And that's actually a bit of a hidden nod to some of the early locomotive classifications where it was just lettering and like that. But the R18 class is actually a very, 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 very goofy little reference in my head, inside joke with me, to anime manga ratings. In Japan, there's a set of ratings with one particular rating called R18. This is usually regarded for the adult-oriented games, like, well, more or less porn games, essentially. In Japan, we'll get this R18 rating. And in Japan, R18 is relatively used in anime, manga, and anime video games, Japanese games. So I decided to design a locomotive similar to that of the R18 class. Originally, the R18s were going to be a very different locomotive, but I thought, well, let's use a mountain. Locomotives are numbered from 1800 to 1895. Kind of a nod to the R18 number, but with the, as well as a few other nods there. What the fuck? Am I seeing a light there? I don't know. Now the Dragon class, these were very minimal repaints, really. In fact, I don't think I did anything to them except for just change the naming on them. The locomotives, much like the R18s, are numbered number 900 to 995. Now, these locomotives were specifically, like in my mind, I wanted these to replace the 210-2s from the Bessemer Lake Erie route, which I showed off before. And I really feel like you could probably interchange the tenders for those locomotives if you wanted to, but they don't look like they would work. Now, interestingly enough, the tenders on these locomotives don't have alpha textures, much like all of Britkit's locomotives. So actually putting the name Tristane National on the side of these tenders was a bit of a challenge. So I actually had to go about and really awkwardly put these cars together, tender-wise and everything like that. And thankfully, I didn't have to do that with the Vanderbilt tenders, but these locomotives themselves, because the Alphatex, these are part of decals actually. I didn't have to really do much on those. So another set of locomotives I did repaint recently are a set of electric locomotives from the Sacramento Northern. They're just basically small re-letters and re-numbers for the most part. That 0, honestly, I could never get rid of it. I had to add it as the numbering, but these are numbered from 10 to 20. These are Tristanian Central, keep that in mind, Tristanian Central steeple cabs for use on electrified portions of various routes. And along with that, over here, you have the Tristanian Central Interurbans. These little guys are numbered 2020, 20, so I believe it's 20, I want to say it's, yeah, it's 2000 to 2050. God, I need to fix that, honestly. I need to fix my brain. But yeah, these cars are relatively simple designs. They vary in number depending on the type of car. So the trailers will have a slightly different numbering system to the original cars. So, other than the lettering on these cars, there's not much on the change here, but there's going to be some more updates to these as time goes on. Now, one other locomotive I want to show off before we really get into the rolling stock in this area is these doodlebugs. I actually made a doodlebug just for fun, or testing rather. This is the Elvenwood and Southern Doodlebug number WT01. Now, it's got the number 31, but I haven't done the renumbering for this locomotive yet. It's a striped version, and the design of it actually comes from the Durango and Silverton Railroad, or the Durango branch, or the Silverton branch of the Denver, Rio Grande, and Western, where it was a golden kind of paint and everything is the same as the design. Interestingly enough, I made these as a test locomotive for something I will mention at the end of the video. And yeah, that's one particular set of locomotives. There are actually a few more hidden away, and I will go to those next before we, again, really go into the rolling stock. Now, of course, the combines are minimal repaints. The only thing really changed on these are the letterings. These will have the Tristanian central lines on the heavyweights and the combine. But the more interesting repaint is sitting right next to us. I actually mentioned this before in the when I was talking about the Frisco repaints. These are part of what is called the Maiden's Rose. When I mentioned the R18's inside joke, it was also the R18 lettering was meant to be more sort of direct, as the Maiden's Rose train is more or less a brothel on wheels. Yeah, this is a brothel on wheels if you want to talk about it. Just, yeah, that kind of stuff. So each car has their own name. So the storage cars, which are the baggage cars, are labeled as Maiden's Heart and Maiden's Gold. Then you have the commoner cars. These are basically the coach cars. These are labeled as Maiden's Rage and Maiden's Power. Noble cars are as follows. Maiden's Fire. I'm going to have to go through and look around just to make sure. Oh, that's a cafe car. Jesus Christ, how many did I make? Maiden's Meadow. Maiden's Forest. Maiden's Goddess, which is another reference there. Maiden's Palace. Maiden's Lover, and Maiden's Feather. Actually, Maiden's Feather is not really changed all that much, because this is actually the Silver Feather. This car's numbering matches up with the Silver Feather's numbering, so I want to talk about that later. There's also a set of observation cars. Their names have not really changed too much. The only change is that another car, other than Maiden's Planet, is the Maiden's Rose. The Maiden's Rose is the actual name car on the set. The only other thing I really need to fix is this. It's still got the California Zephyr tag on the back, but I don't know if I can remove that or not yet. So these sets are not going to be released yet. Now there's also a handful of cars, such as the a set of cars called the Gang Car and the Pedal Car. So yeah, Gang, Bang, and Pedal. Make of it what you will. But each car has a specific name. Maiden's Palisade is for the Gang Car. Another Gang Car is Maiden's Gem. Going further, we have the Maiden's Range. Oops. We have the Maiden's Mountain. Oops. Keep going inside the cars. Don't want to go in there yet. We have the Maiden's... Okay, these are the pedal cars. This is Maiden's Pedal. And this is Maiden's Swallow. Again, make of that what you will, honestly. And then you got the cafe cars. These are actually labeled as cafe cars. So you got Maiden's Bread. And over here you've got Maiden's Earth. And then you got the dining cars called Maiden's Plates. No real name change up there. And Maiden's Platter. Again, no name change. Now, interestingly enough, I didn't realize that this was actually repainted when I repainted this. So I will fix that probably later on. But yeah, that's a whole set right there of a brothel on wheels. So you got that. One other thing I do want to mention here is that there's a set of cabooses now. This is the Tristane National caboose, and there is a Tristanian Central version of the same caboose with slightly different lettering. Now, of course, I talked a little bit of the Tristane National Railway's Red Bull Express trains, and I'll talk a bit more about them further, but I didn't really talk about the loads. These are actually the cars, the trailers you're going to see on the cars. Some of them will be exclusive to the actual consist. Some of them will be exclusive to the Royal Train, while others will be tied. Well, one is tied with both. So each car has got a specific design to it. This particular car, the Brigade car, is a nice little nod to how I really got into anime. Exactly. The Brigade joined today. Haruhi Suzumiya plastered on the sides. The logo on the end and on the rear with Haruhi pointing rear and towards the rear there. I'm actually going to probably make a model of this for Euro Truck Simulator and American Truck Simulator, so get ready to see that. But one curious thing is that this one, this little thing here, we are standing on the backs of giants. That's actually something I wanted to touch on a fanfic of mine, because the Brigade continues on after Haruhi and the others graduate via their children, so the children of the Brigade. Now the next car, this one's unfinished, but this is a Love Live car. This is another little anime car, and the sister car is sitting right there. But this car in particular was basically a standard stock design that you're going to see on the Love Live cars. There's going to be some subtle updates to it, such as the wraparound over here and down here, back here. Gonna have a wraparound. Maybe a few minor details, such as like adding both Muse and A-Rise on the car to kind of signify the two top idol groups. Yes, I know the anime quite well. Maybe even get the girls from Aquas on there too. Now, speaking of the girls from Love Live, this is the Muse trailer. Muse, right there, little gold right on the sides here. And other than so this car has the Love Live lettering on the side here as well. But one thing I didn't intend to do by accident, this was completely by accident. All three of these girls, they're all in the different grades. So you have Honoka, who's in the middle. She's the leader of the group. And not only that, but she's a second year in the anime. In the latter half of the anime. You have Maki, who's a first year in the anime. She's on the right side. And you have Nico-chan. Now, Nico, many people, if you're involved with memes, you probably know this little meme that's recently popped up, the Nico Nico Ni meme. Might as well play a clip for you.
いい？例えばニッコニッコニー、あなたのハートにニコニコニー、笑顔を届ける矢沢ニコニコ、ニコニーって覚えてラブニコ。どう？
So the next set of cars is the Westwood Farms cars. Now I'm going to talk about these a lot more in detail later on, because there's actually a set of rolling stock that's tied with these. But you have the logo, best food grown in the country. Westwood Farms, their logo, similar to the Burlington route. But if you look closely, you'll notice the silhouette has a striking resemblance to one of the characters from Familiar of Zero. Now, if you don't remember, I mentioned that the Tristane National Railway was based off the fanfic of mine that's based on the Familiar of Zero's universe. And this character is Tophinia Westwood, the half-elf that is seen in, I think, the last 2 seasons of the anime. Now, this car is a relatively simple design, but I really like the idea of the design. And the only thing that you're probably going to notice is that the wheels haven't really changed as much. Next car is the Chad Mines, the mine with a heart of gold. This car is somewhat dedication to a good friend of mine, Chad Post. I've actually I haven't talked about him much on any videos really because I want to do a special update on really why I haven't been recording. But Chad really, you know, this has got to be one of my little favorite cars on the set. Not only because this is to Chad himself, but the car itself gives me a very interesting little vibe because it's the paint scheme is very similar to that of the Wabash and the Norfolk and Western, so both designs there. I really like the design. The tagline, "The Mind with a Heart of Gold," came from Chad himself because he's a really good guy. He's a really great friend of mine. I really enjoy talking with him on occasion. So, and before we get on to the main cars, I do want to talk about these particular cars here. These last two cars here are the last two of the non-standard Red Ball Express cars. You got the Tristane Royal Train, which has the phrase Tristane written on the top, same as this one, but this one is the Tristane Royal Army. So, very simple repaints, using the same car design. You can actually see some seams on each of the cars if you look closely. So, it's especially noticeable here on this car, at least I think. Usually it's noticeable. Now the last two cars are a bit awkward, honestly, because they're named backwards. So the Red Ball Express Fireball was actually supposed to be this car, but I accidentally swapped it with this one. So later on, I'm probably going to fix these a little bit. So this is the Red Ball Express How a Nation Moves. This car is very simple. It's supposed to be the modern version. Now the term Red Ball Express actually came about in terms of my gameplay as a reference actually to a game that I used to play. Many people will know this game, Company of Heroes. It's an RTS style game, and there's a mission that deals with a convoy referred to as the Red Ball Express. And I thought, well, why not use the name again? Now, the term "How a Nation Moves" is kind of a subtle nod to the military back in World War II, that an entire nation had to move via trucks and convoys and whatnot during the days of World War II. And I thought, well, that's going to be a nice nod to it. But the Fireball service, that one was a bit more interesting, to say the least. I love the tagline I came up with. The Fireball service was, is much more noticeable here, "Going snail mail. Ain't nobody got time for that." So I'm sure many of you guys know what that's a reference to, but here you go.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
A lot of third-party clips here, aren't there? So the Red Ball Express flat cars I've talked about just a little bit. They have very little detail to them. The boxcar red is used for these cars. The Royal Train features royal purple with gold lettering. But to couple with the Royal Train, like, you have both passenger cars of the Tristanian, as these cars are tended to be added to it for the most part. But to run these cars without a caboose, kind of sacrilegious, don't you think? So, with the Feather River Canyon, I decided to add a caboose for the Tristanian. So this is the Tristanian Express caboose, and it's only usually attached to the train if the Red Ball Express 2FCs are added to the rear. Now, numbering-wise, it does match up with the Red Ball Express with the Tristanian as well, because the cars are actually numbered in the 500s, while the cabooses are numbered in the 400s. So it actually is not bad in detail. Cab view is relatively the same as the Feather River Canyon caboose, and other than lettering on the top, not much has changed on the caboose. I'll probably be editing the numbers as well as a few other decals on it, such as these guys. Barely see these guys, honestly. But yeah, there you go. Now I mentioned that there's going to be a handful of there was a handful of repaints that were tied to the Westwood Farms cars. Well, here they are. These are the Westwood Farms rolling stock set, for the most part. These come in loaded and unloaded variants for the stock cars, as well as an open version of the stock cars, loaded and unloaded versions of the pickle car, reefer cars, you know, the whole bit, the whole 9 yards. Now, once again, the emblems on the side here, I will probably have to go around so you can see it better. And that sun glare is really annoying. But there's the logo. Lettering, WFSX, with the X meaning extra. These cars are simple reletterings. Not much there. But this one did have a lot of changes to it. The best food grown in the country was on this car. Westwood Farms, lettering down here, which I believe I didn't have to add. But I did have to add details to this car. So, interestingly enough, there's no decals for the lettering on the side of the car or anything on the car. So, this is heavily changed. So, the logo is plastered directly on the car, no decal or whatever. I do want to put a decal on it later. Westwood Farms, plastered on the car. The shipping mark, Westwood Farms Shipping Company, or Extra. And once again, there's extra and unloaded. There's also a set of tank cars added as well. These are part of the Dragon's Blood Refinery Company. Now, this is actually a subtle, pretty much I guess it's a direct reference to a episode of the anime of Familiar Zero, where they refer to gasoline as Dragon's Blood. So a refinery, later on in the fanfic that I'm writing, is basically called Dragon's Blood Refinery. And you got a set of tank cars for it. Once again, these have the letters DBRX for the shipping labels. Got the heavyweight sitting here again. And actually, before we go, this was the Tristanian Central caboose I was talking about here. Not much of a detail change here. Now, the only other car we have that's pretty much... This car here is fairly incomplete, but this is a PS1... PS-1 boxcar for the Elvenwood and Southern, similar to that of the Doodlebug I showed off earlier. The most scenic line in Tristane is its tagline. Now over here I'm going to set up some sort of emblem similar to that, similar in design of the Denver Rio Grande. It's going to be situated on both sides. But there you have it. That's actually quite a bit of content. God damn it, it's missing again. Well, I guess this is technically a good time to talk about it, though. So you know that announcement I was talking about towards the end of the video? I mentioned it early in the beginning of the video, as well as towards the end. Well, you're looking at it. This is the Tristane National Railways Academy Corridor, or what's currently built of it. This is Tristania, the capital city. Tristania, the palace, situated right here. Tried to do as best I could for the palace. I don't have any reference material for that. Church bells going off. You have the barracks situated here. Now, there's supposed to be a building here, but it's just missing, honestly. Don't know why. And you have quite a bit going on here. And I will talk about this in great detail in an upcoming video. But guys, I want to leave you with some information on, if you want to find out more about the Tristane National Railways Academy Corridor, well, feel free to check out the Discord linked down below. Check out the Facebook page of the Shadow Steel 18 channel network, because I'll talk about it there on occasion. And what's more, if you want to check out even further content, there's going to be a lot of places you can go to check out all this content. Go to the Train Sim Returns website, where I've announced that I will be working with them. And yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and tell me how you guys feel about that new intro. It was something I wanted to do for a while. It's a very short intro, but I feel it gets the job done, just like these repaints. So, take care everyone. Hope you enjoy. To find out more about the Tristane National Railway and their fleet of steam locomotives and equipment, check out the Discord page, linked down below. If you like this video, subscribe to this channel, as well as the secondary channel, The Otaku Gamer. Also, feel free to check out the Facebook page, linked down below.